I'm Jamie Dowsall, the Managing Director with Sustainable Aviation Futures, and today I'm speaking with Amy Herbert, the CEO with Arcadia eFuels. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Amy. I'd like to start this off by just sort of understanding a little bit more about you and about Arcadia as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background and also about what Arcadia eFuels do, please?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Nice to be here with you today. Yes, as you said, I'm Amy Herbert. I'm the CEO of Arcadia eFuels. Arcadia eFuels has been around for the past 2.5 years. We started the company with the ambition to be a first mover, bringing eSAF to the marketplace on a commercial scale. And that's what we've been doing ever since then. I think previously to joining Arcadia, I was the deputy CEO of Herbert, based out of Denmark. And then before that, I've worked for companies like Celanese and Albemarle in Europe and also in the US. I think I've been in and out of Europe for the past 15 years. So it's nice that Arcadia eFuels is developing our first site in Denmark and a second site in the UK, and then a third site in the US. So we're also kind of following European and US geographies.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And yeah, we were talking earlier about the benefits of that, living in Austin versus living in Denmark. And obviously each has its own benefits and its own weather patterns as well, which I can talk about in great detail living in London myself. Look, I think in terms of people who don't know much about eFuels, what are some of the sustainability benefits of Arcadia's eFuels particularly?
Yeah, also when we got Arcadia eFuels off the ground, I mean, we wanted to be able to demonstrate a fully sustainable plant to make carbon neutral fuels, right? The technology existed. No one was really looking into doing this. And so we thought, hey, why shouldn't we bring this to market? So we have designed a facility that, uses seawater instead of fresh water for the electrolysis. We have designed a facility that is completely fossil free. So it's a fully electrified plant with no fossil fuel inputs whatsoever. And then it's also using the, commercially proven gas to liquids facilities. The only thing that's really new with what we're doing is we're using an electrified heating of the syngas reactor. So that's the new element, but everything else, is working. And so it's putting it together is not trivial, of course, and getting these off the ground is a lot of work, but we want to be able to show that this is how it goes. The fuels that we will be producing are completely carbon neutral. They're actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions just over 100%. So it really is the only pathway to complete carbon neutral fuels, regardless of how you do carbon accounting, right? So there are some creative ways other SAF is accounting for the carbon, but we wanted to do things really with the correct point of view on sustainability, regardless of how the regulations are shaking out.
That's really interesting to hear, and thanks for that sort of summary. I think one of the exciting things is obviously you're doing it. You're building plants. I think when we're talking about SAF in terms of general SAF, whether it's eFuels or biogenic, there's a lot of discussion around planning, around people who think they're going to have SAF facilities in place, but you guys are doing it. Could you tell us how things are going in that respect and how that progression has been in terms of the facility that you're building in Denmark?
Yeah, so when we got started a few years ago, we thought it would be a lot easier, I'll have to say. It is challenging. I think, we've calculated that it'll take from start to finish about 7 years, even on an aggressive schedule, to get one of these eFuels plants built at scale, right? We're not talking pilot scale here. We're actually talking, a reasonable commercial size unit. So it's a 7-year process. There are a lot of complications with electricity sourcing, grid connections, CO2 sourcing, right? This is all a brand new market. So everyone is developing at the same time throughout the supply chain. So I think this will become a lot easier in the future, but it's important to note that this is a long timeline, and we need other companies being able to jump in and develop these facilities so that we can meet the European mandates starting in 2030 for RFNBO compliant SAF.
Yeah, absolutely. That 2030 is coming up very quickly on the horizon, particularly given the timescales that you just mentioned. And it's just why, having that sort of action plan in place in the next 12 months is so important at this stage. And obviously, you've mentioned earlier that you've got operations both the US and Europe, very different approaches to sort of helping to scale SAF. I mean, how will support mechanisms or, on the other hand, mandates influence your production and where you site facilities?
Yeah, so the mandates in Europe are certainly helpful because it definitely drives demand. I think it is still a little bit tricky in Europe because these mandates, well, for SAF kick in 2025, right? So next year, and then the e-fuel mandates, the eSAF mandates kick in 2030. But for the end customers, the airlines, et cetera, that's a long way away, right? To make a commitment in 6 years out. So I think that's a little bit challenging for the whole industry to understand the timelines involved here. So in contrast, if we look at what the US is doing, there are no mandates, but then there are incentives for producers with the Inflation Reduction Act to be able to lower the cost of product directly at the manufacturing level, so that then we're able to go out and have a more competitive price compared to fossil fuels and be able to secure the long-term offtake agreements necessary to secure the financing of the project. So that's quite nice. And I think the UK is probably the best of both worlds. It hasn't passed yet, but what we're seeing in the UK is there's the discussions around revenue certainty or contract for difference, which really, really, really helps tremendously being able to get these projects off the ground and secure the financing needed, before mandates are going to be in place. So I think that the UK is really doing it right. We haven't, again, it's not finalized yet, but what they're talking about is really helpful. I think that the UK has mentioned that they want to have several different pathways to make SAF in local production. And so we really are happy, and they're not just talking, they're actually doing it, right? So that's really fantastic. I know that Europe will probably get there. There is a lot of discussion. I think that Europe is now seeing a lot of even just green hydrogen projects that were announced not coming to fruition because of these challenges in getting the financing. So our hope, and also the discussions we're having with various European officials and also at this state level in Europe, will hopefully change that and make some of these projects a little bit easier to get financed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the UK Jet Zero Council in particular is doing fantastic work, and just they're saying all the right things, maybe in the right direction too. And time will tell really if that all sort of comes to fruition. And obviously we hope it does. And some of those lessons can be replicated obviously in different markets around the world as well. I mean, if we're looking at Europe specifically, and I know this is a very short time frame where we're looking forward to 2030 and beyond, but we're now sitting here in March 2024. I mean, by the end of December 2024, I mean, what do you think the European SAF market will look like? Do you envisage any large-scale changes or any small-scale changes that you think are really going to help to sort of drive and progress the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every year, if you look back at a year ago from now, right, things are completely different. So every year, I think the whole industry and also the regulators are learning tremendous amount of information. What we see happening in 2024 is a lot of airlines are working to secure their 2025 SAF mandates in Europe. We have other airlines around the world watching to see, what the European airlines are doing and how they can stay competitive with customers, demanding to have sustainable fuel as they fly. So I think a lot of these things will start coming to fruition in 2024. Many companies are considering book and claim and how that works and how to offer their customers, airline passengers, certificates for carbon neutral travel. So those things will accelerate. We also are going to probably see projects like Arcadia's, getting close to financial close, and how the support mechanisms between European and state aid will support these projects. So I do think we'll see quite a bit of movement in 2024. We have to see it, or the mandates won't come into place in Europe.
It's funny you mentioned that. I could swear last year at the Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress in Europe, everyone was talking about what North America was doing. And this year, we've already had our MENA Congress, and then we're also currently speaking with our North American counterparts, and everybody's looking at what Europe's doing now. I think with Refuel EU Aviation on the horizon, everyone's quite interested to see what impact that will have on the industry and what's going to happen in that respect. You talked just now about support from national governments and also the European potential support from European countries. You recently received a grant from the UK Department of Transportation. Could you maybe just give us a very quick summary of that process and what's needed for more projects to secure financing on that scale?
Yeah, so as when you develop a SAF or eSAF project, I mean the development costs are enormous, right? I mean you're looking at 20 to 40 million euros of development cost prior to financial close, so that's significant. So what the UK has done is they've given grants to cover partially the development costs, so that's very, very helpful. Um, I think the challenge though is now, I think a lot of companies are getting through their development or have development funding secured. So now all eyes are on the next phase. How do we get the project financing fund secure? And these are very capital intensive industries, right? We're basically building a refinery. So it's very, very capital intensive. I think if we look back to what happened with the wind and solar industries in the early 2000s, those were also capital intensive industries at the time. And there was tremendous government support for wind and solar companies to get these, wind and solar farms off the ground. And now it's amazing to see, 20 years later, how wind and solar is really growing. It can stand alone. It doesn't have to be subsidized anymore. And I think this is the same kind of approach we're going to need for SAF and eSAF. Because of the capital intensive industries, we're going to need more government support, just like what happened in wind and solar. Um, the prices for SAF and eSAF are more expensive than fossil fuels, right? But we hope that 20 years from now, that will start to close in, just like we're seeing wind and solar energy closing in with fossil-based energy. But it's going to take some creative solutions from regulators and governments to help support these SAF and eSAF industries in the early years.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, especially if you look at the price of, one solar module 20 years ago, as you mentioned, and how it was seen as an extremely luxury item compared to, warehouses being filled in China because there's so many now and them selling them relatively cheaply. So we can only hope SAF goes in the same direction. Amy, look, obviously, we're really delighted to have Arcadia as a partner and a sponsor for the upcoming Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress taking place in Europe, in Amsterdam from the 21st to the 23rd of May. You're participating as a speaker in a couple of sessions. What are you hoping to share with the audience? What are you hoping to talk about, and what are you hoping to learn from the other participants in the event?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to say this will be Arcadia eFuels' third year going to the Amsterdam conference. So that's really exciting. We've seen it grow tremendously over the course of these 3 years. And interestingly enough, the first year we went, which was 3 years ago, or actually 2 years ago, we actually met the investor that has invested with us in their top company, Sven Capital. So that was really nice to have done that and found that at the SAF Futures Conference. And so this year, we actually are sponsoring part of the event, which we're really happy about. And we want to communicate around bringing commercial scale eSAF to the market. The challenges and also the wins that we've had and that the whole market has had. We also, want to talk a little bit about the regulatory situation and how that's playing out in the different countries and parts of the world. And then, we hope to continue to meet as we have the last few years. We meet a lot of people. We have some of our potential customers are there, investors, regulators. So just bringing everyone together is very helpful to help facilitate some of these discussions and break down the barriers and the challenges that the SAF and the eSAF markets face.
Yeah, obviously, it's not the first time you've told me this. I'm always delighted to hear that you'd made that sort of crucial connection at our first SAF conference. So obviously, really looking forward to seeing you in Amsterdam this May, and obviously to hear more about what Arcadia is doing. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jamie, and see you soon.